My name is Katie Monroe. I'm 18 years old. And this is the story of how the people I called my parents kicked me out on my birthday, without knowing I had already uncovered a secret that would burn everything they built to the ground. It started with chocolate cake. The smell hit me the moment I stepped out of my room that morning. Warm, rich, a little burnt around the edges. It was the kind of smell that belonged in childhood memories or holiday dinners, but not in our house. My mom wasn't the baking type. She never had been. Her version of cooking came from boxes and cans, and the only time she stepped into the kitchen was to clip coupons from milk cartons or microwave leftovers. But today she baked a cake. I should have known something was off. Still in my gray pajamas, hair in a messy bun, I padded into the living room with a nervous smile. My heart was fluttering for no reason. I turned 18 today. I guess deep down I thought maybe something would be different. Maybe this time there'd be candles, a gift, a hug, something. But when I walked into the room, my dad was already sitting in his usual chair, arms stiff, eyes staring at the floor. Mom sat on the edge of the couch, hands locked together like she was trying to stop them from shaking. Neither of them smiled. Not even a happy birthday. "Sit down," Dad said, his voice low, cold. The same tone he used when I broke the dining room lamp back in 6th grade. Sat, quiet, alert. Storm was coming. Mom spoke first. Her voice was tight, like she'd rehearsed every word. "You were adopted." I didn't move. Didn't blink. I just stared at the floor, at a loose thread in the carpet that had never mattered until now. "You came to us when you were almost 3, Dad added. "Your birth mother couldn't care for you. We did what we could. No hugs, no apologies, no emotion. Just facts like they were reading a weather report." I gripped the hem of my shirt. My breath was shallow. I wanted to scream. But I didn't. I'd learned long ago that screaming got you nowhere in a house built on silence. "It's time for you to go your own way," Mom said next. Her voice didn't crack. It wasn't angry. It wasn't even sad. Just flat. Final. Then Dad reached beneath his chair and pulled out a small canvas duffel bag. It thudded onto the hardwood floor, heavier than it looked. He nudged it toward me with his foot. "Some cash, a few clothes," he said. "We booked you a motel room for the weekend. After that, you're on your own." I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I just stood up. "Thank you," I whispered. Not because I was grateful, but because I wanted them to remember how calm I was as I walked away from the only life I'd ever known. What they didn't know was this. Already knew. Because 3 weeks earlier, I'd found something they never expected. Something that changed everything. It started when I was digging for old records to fill out a scholarship form. I'd opened the hallway cabinet upstairs, the one they used for tax returns and warranty documents, and found a yellowing envelope at the bottom. It was tucked beneath a stack of dusty manila folders. No label, no stamps, just a name written in cursive across the front. 4L Wexler. I didn't know who that was. But what was inside nearly made me drop it. A birth certificate. My name was there, Katie Monroe. But under Mother, it listed a name I had never seen in my life. Madison Vexler. The father line was blank. I sat on the floor, legs shaking, the cheap carpet rough beneath my knees. I read it again and again, until my hands stopped trembling long enough to tuck it back into the envelope. I hid it beneath my mattress, along with a sinking feeling that nothing in my life had ever really belonged to me, not even my name. For the next 3 weeks, I became someone else. Someone quiet, butching, pretending to be the girl they thought I still was. But at night I searched. I stayed up in the library after school. I read news archives, scoured forums, posted on boards meant for people looking for lost family. I didn't ask anyone in the house. I didn't want them to know. And then I found her. Madison Vexler. Not a criminal. Not a runaway. Not a ghost. She was a psychology researcher. A brilliant one. There were photos. Young, serious, sharp eyes behind rectangular glasses. She used to work at something called the Harrow Institute for Integrated Mental Health. But then came the scandal. In 2004, She'd filed an internal report accusing the Harrow Institute's director, Dr. Colin Harrow, of unethical practices. Things like unapproved drug trials, behavioral conditioning, experiments on women who had no legal guardians, women who couldn't say no. A week after she filed the complaint, she was suspended. A month later, she was declared unstable and institutionalized at a facility called Maplewood Hills. After that, her name disappeared. No articles, no updates, just gone. But here's the part that still makes my blood go cold. The foundation that funded the Harrow Institute, the one backing those experiments, was called the Vail Foundation. And guess who was listed in a 2011 donor report as a distinguished benefactor? Gregory Monroe, my so-called adoptive father. There was a note attached. For his special contribution to post-recovery support programs. Recovery. Support. I thought about the way he used to stand in church and talk about second chances. I remembered the speeches at community dinners. The way people clapped for him like he was some kind of hero. But all I could see now was a man with blood on his hands. The man who raised me just to keep me hidden. That day, as I stood in the motel parking lot with a bag full of thrift store clothes and a folder of lies, I made a decision. I wasn't going to disappear like they hoped. I was going to find out who my mother really was. And I was going to make sure the people who locked her away would finally be seen in the light. Even if it destroyed everything. The motel they left me in sat on the edge of a crumbling interstate, right between a pawn shop and a shuttered diner with peeling paint and broken neon. The air reeked of bleach and mildew. Every step I took on the stained carpet squelched underfoot like something was rotting underneath. But none of it mattered. Because I wasn't staying. I dropped the canvas bag by the side of the bed and pulled out the only thing that mattered. The yellow envelope with a birth certificate inside. My hands were shaking again, not from fear, but from purpose. That paper wasn't just a piece of my past. It was my map, my weapon. At sunrise, I walked to the only place I felt safe, the public library downtown. I'd grown up in that building. It had the kind of silence that felt sacred, not suffocating. The smell of old pages, the faint hum of computers, the gentle whisper of people who understood that truth didn't scream. It whispered. I sat at a corner terminal, logged in and typed. Madison Vexler. But this time I didn't stop at newspaper articles. I dove deeper. Government documents, private research leaks, archived employee directories. And then something new appeared. A name that hadn't been in the original articles. Dr. Colin Harrow. The director of the Harrow Institute. The man my mother had accused. He wasn't just a doctor, he was a pioneer in something called neurobehavioral restructuring. Fancy way to say he played God with people's minds. Women mostly. Vulnerable, poor, forgotten women. And then came the name that twisted the knife deeper. The Vail Foundation. A private fund that supported the Harrow Institute from 2000 to 2005. I opened their archived financial reports and there, buried in the fine print, was a name that made me gasp out loud. Gregory Monroe. It wasn't just a donation. It was a special contribution to behavioral reconditioning trials. My chest tightened. Could barely breathe. All these years I thought Greg Monroe was just cold. Emotionally distant. But he was more than that. He was a key piece in the system that destroyed my birth mother. That night, I didn't go back to the motel. I found a coffee shop that stayed open late and curled into a booth near the back. My coat was still zipped up. My fingers were blue from the cold, but I barely noticed. I spread out every document I had, printed articles, and the birth certificate. Then I opened my notebook and began to draw lines. Names, dates, addresses. And at the center of everything was Madison Vexler, the woman who was silenced for speaking out. The woman I had been stolen from. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. Plan. The next morning I started calling. I used fake names, fake stories. I called mental health facilities, state archives, medical records offices, anywhere that might have a file on her. Most people hung up. Some transferred me to voicemails that led nowhere. But then one voice stopped me cold. An older woman, calm but curious. When I said Madison's name, she paused. "You're not the first to ask about her," she whispered. Then she hung up. Those words haunted me. Who else was asking? Who else knew? Took 2 more weeks of digging before I found it. An obscure forum post on psychiatric care anomalies. An old user named Shadow Paradigm mentioned that after Maplewood Hills shut down, certain sensitive patients had been transferred to a facility called Clear Haven Recovery Center. No address, no contact info, just a name. Took a risk. I found a payphone, dialed an outdated number I found connected to an old foundation directory, and asked for Clear Haven. A woman answered. She sounded young, guarded. I asked about Madison Vexler. There was a pause. Then she asked, "What is your relationship to Miss Vexler?" Took a breath. The truth sat on my tongue like a burning coal. "I'm her daughter." 10 seconds of silence. Then, "You can visit, but only during restricted hours. And you'll have to sign a no-recording agreement." "I understand." The next morning I was on the first bus to the northern suburbs. The ride took hours, winding past farmland, then into thick mist-covered hills. Clear Haven didn't look like a hospital. It looked like a forgotten castle, stone walls wrapped in dead ivy, a sagging roofline, and windows that stared blankly into the trees. It sat alone, deliberately hidden. I stepped through the front doors, heart racing. The scent of antiseptic and old would hit me like a memory I'd never lived but somehow knew. The woman at the front desk slid over a clipboard with a waiver form, then nodded to the staircase. "Room 14. You have 15 minutes. I climbed the stairs slowly, hand on the railing, each step echoing in the empty hall. The door was white, chipped paint around the edges. I stood there for a moment, hand on the knob, before finally turning it. She was sitting by the window. Her hair was silver, thin, and fell around her face like silk threads. She was reading, or maybe pretending to. The light from the window made her skin look almost translucent. I whispered, "Miss Madison?" She turned. Her eyes met mine, deep brown, wide and worn. Something flickered in them. Recognition. Hope. "I'm Katie," I said, stepping forward. "You had a daughter 18 years ago." Tears welled up in her eyes, but none fell. She blinked, slow and steady. "I remember," she said, voice barely audible. "I never forgot." I pulled out the birth certificate. The articles. I placed them on the table between us. "I found everything. I know they took me. I know you didn't leave me." She stared at the papers, then looked back at me. "They said I was paranoid," she whispered. "That I imagined things. But I knew. I knew too much." And then she told me everything. They tested drugs on patients. Women with no families. No guardians. They made them sign forms they couldn't read. And when she tried to report it, they labeled her unstable. Within weeks, she was locked away and erased. I asked her the question that had haunted me most. Greg Monroe. Was he part of it? She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Her hand trembled just at the mention of his name. "He coordinated funding," she said eventually. "From Vale. When they took me, they sealed your file. I tried to fight. I wrote letters. But then they said I was no longer legally competent." I clenched my fists. "They adopted me." "Just to shut you up?" She nodded, eyes never leaving mine. "You are living proof of a crime. They thought raising you would erase what they did." For the first time in my life, I started crying and didn't try to stop. She reached for my hand, hesitant at first. Her touch was thin, frail, but it was the warmest thing I had ever felt. "Be careful," she whispered as the nurse knocked. "They still watch. People like Greg. They don't let go." As I walked out into the cold afternoon, I wasn't scared anymore. I was furious, and I was ready, because now I had something more powerful than rage. I had the truth. I didn't go back to the motel that night. I didn't want to sleep in a place that smelled like old sweat and bleach. I needed somewhere I could think. So I walked. 4 hours. Until I found an all-night diner on the edge of town with flickering lights and a waitress who didn't ask questions. I ordered a coffee I couldn't afford and took the corner booth by the window. My notebook hit the table with a quiet thud. I opened it to a blank page. Then I started writing. Places. Connections. I traced every path that led to Madison, every hand that helped silence her, every institution that profited off her pain. And right in the center of it all sat two names written in ink that bled into the paper. Gregory Monroe. Colin Harrow. They built a lie and wrapped it in silence. But I wasn't silent anymore. I returned to the city the next day and headed straight to the public library. I dug through everything I could on the Harrow Institute, the Vail Foundation, and anyone even remotely connected. I found donation records, archived staff directories, even conference videos where Colin Harrow was celebrated for advancing the field of behavioral therapy. Made my skin crawl. And then I found a name buried in an old forum for whistleblowers in psychiatric care. Judith Campbell. She was a former nurse at Maplewood Hills, the facility Madison was first sent to. The comment said she'd left the profession after 2010 and now lived off-grid, but was rumored to be one of the last people who knew what really happened inside those walls. It took me 3 days of tracing disconnected phone numbers, old mailing addresses, and obscure email handles. I finally found an old P.O. box in a town 3 hours north. I didn't know what else to do, so I wrote a letter. Simple, honest, shared. I told her I was Madison's daughter, that I had found proof, that I needed help. I included a copy of the birth certificate, and a blurry printout of one of the articles. Mailed it, and waited. I didn't expect anything. Part of me thought maybe she'd died, or worse, been silenced like everyone else. But 1 week later, I received an email from an anonymous address. I know who your mother is. Meet me Saturday, back entrance of Larkspur Cafe. 10 a.m. Come alone. The email vanished seconds after I read it. Saturday couldn't come fast enough. Barely slept. I kept my documents in a backpack strapped to me like a lifeline. I arrived at the Larkspur Cafe early and sat at a metal bench near the back door, surrounded by peeling posters and a single dying potted plant. Then I saw her. Gray hair. Long wool coat. Sharp eyes that missed nothing. You're Madison's daughter, she said without introduction. You have her eyes. I wanted to cry. Instead I nodded. I need proof, I said. Not just for me. For her. Judith looked around, then opened her weathered leather bag. She pulled out a flash drive, small, scratched, with a faded label that read, Jichan. This contains everything I was able to copy before I left, she whispered. Medical logs, patient files, and a video. One Madison recorded secretly. She kept it hidden in her locker. I took it with shaking hands. Is it enough? Yes. Her voice dropped. Not yet. But it's something they can't bury. Back in the city, I knew I couldn't do this alone anymore. I needed someone who knew how to expose the truth and survive the storm that came after. One name came to mind, Mara Reyes. She used to be an investigative journalist. She was fired from her job at a major network for pursuing a medical corruption story that got too close to someone powerful. Since then, she ran an underground blog filled with case files, leaked recordings, and exposés the mainstream press ignored. I sent her an email with one sentence. I have video, internal documents, and the names of those who buried my mother alive. She called within the hour. Her voice was gravelly and dry, like someone who'd smoked too much and seen even more. Is this a joke? She asked. No. Was. Then meet me. Tomorrow. 7 p.m. Old Broadcast Building, 3rd floor. Come alone. That night I didn't sleep. I just sat at the window of a 24-hour diner and watched the city move on like the world wasn't rotting from the inside out. When I arrived at the studio the next evening, it was dark and cold. The building looked abandoned. The elevator didn't work. I climbed 3 flights of stairs to a room that used to be a newsroom but now looked like a bunker for forgotten truths. Boxes stacked to the ceiling. Old monitors. A map of the U.S. with red strings pinned across it like a spider's web. Mara stood by a table, arms crossed, waiting. I handed her the flash drive. She booted up an old tower PC, eyes scanning the files. When the video started to play, I couldn't look away. It showed Madison, my mother, restrained in a chair, her voice shaky but clear. A man off-screen asked her about post-injection side effects. She answered every question with calm precision, until her hands began to tremble and her speech slurred. Her eyes darted to the camera. "I don't consent to this," she whispered. Then it cut out. Mara leaned back. Her face was pale. "This is real," she said. "It's raw. It's enough to scare them, but not enough to stop them." Yet, I stared at her. "What do we do?" She turned to me, eyes blazing. "We bring the storm." Mara didn't work like the reporters I'd seen on TV. She didn't shout into microphones or chase ambulances. Her strength was quiet, methodical, like a surgeon planning every incision before she made the first cut. "This isn't about getting clicks," she told me as she pulled out 3 burner phones from a drawer and handed me one. "This is about precision. If you swing once and run, they'll clean it up before lunch." So we didn't swing. We waited. And while we waited, we prepared. Mara reached out to 3 former attorneys who had once investigated medical ethics violations before their cases were mysteriously dropped. I contacted 2 whistleblower platforms using the secure portal she gave me and uploaded the video, the patient logs, and the donation records from the Veil Foundation. Judith, the nurse who risked everything just to hand me that flash drive, agreed to do something even braver. She wrote an official statement. It was short but devastating. An account of what she saw, what she documented, and the voices that were silenced one by one, room by room. She even attached an audio file from a private therapy session with Madison. Her voice pleading for help, lucid, clear, and unmistakably sane. The moment we had everything in place, we chose a date. April 12th. That was the day everything would go live. All at once. At exactly 7 a.m., the flash drive's contents were uploaded to an international whistleblower site. The video of Madison being questioned under sedation hit Twitter first, posted by an anonymous medical ethics account with 120,000 followers. The article Mara wrote, a 5,000-word deep dive with documents, names, timelines, went live on an independent investigative news site. A podcast episode, recorded in secret days earlier, aired an hour later featuring Judith's voice and mine, telling everything. And the names. Gregory Monroe and Colin Harrow weren't just buried in footnotes anymore. They were in bold, cross headlines, cross hashtags, cross thousands of retweets. The response was immediate, and it was electric. I watched from the same corner of the same library where I started all this, refreshing the screen again and again. Comments flooded in. Messages from people whose loved ones had been patients at Maplewood or Clear Haven. Stories of mysterious drug trials, of women who entered for mild therapy and came out unrecognizable. One woman even posted a video of her mother, blank eyes, slurred speech, being escorted from a medical van into what she now realized was Maplewood Hills. Then came the document leak. Mara had arranged for a former data analyst to scrape archived government contracts and private donation logs. What we found made my hands go numb. The Veil Foundation hadn't just supported the Harrow Institute. They funded a pilot program called Female Behavioral Reconditioning. Phase 1. Sounded like science fiction. But it wasn't. It was a real program run on real women. Hidden in plain sight. Within 3 days, the State Attorney General's office announced a formal investigation. By the end of the week, federal authorities had joined in. Agents raided the offices of the Veil Foundation, Clear Haven Recovery Center, and even the warehouse where old Maplewood Hills records had supposedly been destroyed. They weren't destroyed. They were moved, classified. But now, they were evidence. I remember sitting at a diner across from Mara when the news flashed on a muted TV overhead. A Chiron reading, Harrow, Monroe invited to cooperate with investigators. Legal team issues blanket denial. She looked at me over her coffee, her voice low but unshaking. "You started this." I stared at the screen. "No," I whispered. My mother did. I'm just finishing it. But I wasn't finished. Not yet. Because Madison was still inside Clear Haven, and every day she spent there was a day stolen from her life. We knew what we had to do. Mara called in a favor from a legal contact at the prosecutor's office. Judith provided a sworn affidavit confirming Madison's involuntary commitment based on falsified documentation. I signed a declaration as her biological daughter and legal next of kin. And with that we had the leverage we needed. We didn't show up like rebels or protesters. We showed up with paperwork, with subpoenas, with truth backed by law. We arrived at Clear Haven on a gray morning. The fog was thick, the air damp. Mara drove. Judith sat beside me in the back, her hands trembling as we pulled into the gated driveway. I dreamt of this moment for so long. The woman at the front desk gave us a look like we didn't belong. But when Mara handed over the signed order from the prosecutor's office, her face turned pale. She disappeared into the back for a long time. Then finally a nurse returned and said, "She'll be brought down shortly." I don't remember breathing. All I remember is the sound of footsteps. And then she appeared. Madison. My mother. Her silver hair was pulled back loosely. She wore a simple sweater and jeans. No restraints. No fear. Just tired eyes scanning the room, until they landed on me. Understood. She smiled. Not a full smile. Just the beginning of one. The kind of smile you wait 19 years to see. I ran to her. Held her hand. "Let's go home," I whispered. She didn't ask where. She didn't ask why now. She just nodded and walked with us through the double doors of the facility. Doors that had caged her for nearly 2 decades. Outside, for the first time, the sun broke through the clouds. We didn't go straight back to the city. Judith had arranged a temporary stay for Madison at a support center for healthcare whistleblowers. A quiet place with real therapists, legal help, and most of all, people who believed her. That night, I slept for the first time in weeks. On a fold-out couch next to the room where Madison was finally safe. And I dreamed of nothing. Because the nightmare finally was over. Or so I thought. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not just in temperature but in presence. It was the kind of room that swallowed voices, muffled breath, and absorbed pain without ever echoing it back. I sat in the back row, hands folded tightly in my lap, heart pounding in time with the ticking of the courtroom clock. The walls were lined with wood paneling and solemn faces. Legal teams shuffled papers. Reporters whispered behind pens and smartphones. But all I could see, my entire field of vision, was the man sitting at the defense table in a tailored navy suit. Gregory Monroe. He didn't look at me when he walked in. But I looked at him. Not with anger. Not with hate. But with something more dangerous. Clarity. This was the man who'd raised me, who'd packed my clothes into a canvas bag and called it love. This was the man who accepted a child not out of kindness, but to hide a crime. He hadn't just betrayed my mother. He'd used me as a cover story. The judge entered. The attorneys stood. And the trial began. It wasn't just about Gregory Monroe anymore. It was about a network, a system of silence, corruption, and falsified diagnoses used to discredit whistleblowers like Katie Vexler. Alongside Monroe sat another familiar name. Dr. Colin Harrow. His medical license had already been revoked. But now he was facing something more permanent. As the prosecution laid out the case, piece by piece, the cracks began to show. First came the video. Madison strapped to a chair, her voice firm as she refused consent to be medicated. Her words played across the courtroom like an alarm finally heard after being ignored for too long. Then came the documents. The unapproved drug trial logs, the internal report signed by Harrow himself, the donation receipts from the Vail Foundation listing Gregory Monroe as a special contributor to rehabilitative behavioral programs. The audience was silent, until the prosecutor said my name. Katie Monroe. I felt every eye turned to me. The child illegally adopted during an internal whistleblower cover-up. There was an audible gasp. A woman in the second row dropped her pen. I didn't flinch. Because this time I wasn't the secret. I was the proof. The prosecution then introduced Judith Campbell, the former nurse who had stood beside me when I walked Madison out of Clear Haven. Her testimony was calm, composed, and devastating. She described the culture of fear inside Maplewood Hills. The drug test, the silencing, the threats, she said. Madison wasn't unstable. She was the only one sane enough to be terrified. And then, for the final blow, came the audio recording Mara and I had uncovered just days before the hearing. A phone call saved in an old inbox, recovered through forensic data recovery. The voice was unmistakable. Greg Monroe. Saying, "Keep the child. It'll shut her up." The courtroom was still. No coughing. No shifting. Just silence, heavy and choking. When the audio stopped, I saw it. Greg looked at me. And for the first time in my life, he wasn't cold or stern or disappointed. He was afraid. 'Cause he knew. His house of lies had collapsed. The judge called a recess. Reporters swarmed the hallway. Mara leaned over and whispered, "You just did what they thought was impossible." I didn't respond. Because I hadn't done it alone. Madison sat behind me, her hand wrapped loosely around mine. She wore a gray cardigan. Her hair was still silver, but her eyes, those deep, mournful eyes, were steady now. She squeezed my fingers. "I told you they'd listen," I whispered. "They didn't," she replied softly. "You made them." The trial wasn't over, not officially. But the damage was done. Over the next 2 weeks, witness after witness testified. Former employees of the Vail Foundation. Ex-patients of Harrow's Institute. Even a few administrators from the adoption agency that processed my papers stepped forward to admit there were unusual instructions surrounding my case. It was no longer a story. It was a reckoning. Gregory Monroe and Colin Harrow were both indicted on multiple federal charges: abuse of power, falsification of medical records, unlawful interference in the adoption process, and conspiracy to conceal human rights violations. They didn't walk out free. They walked out in handcuffs. But justice doesn't always come in headlines. Sometimes it comes quietly, in moments no camera ever captures. Like the letter I found slipped into my bag the day of the final hearing. No name. Just a sentence written in looping script. "You're not the first. But you are the first to survive." Attached was a photo of a woman. Short hair. Glasses. Cautious smile. The name on the back said, Rebecca Harlow. A journalism student who once investigated Maplewood Hills. She'd vanished in 2012. Till now. I emailed the address printed faintly on the back of the photo. And 1 day later she replied. I didn't get to finish back then. But I never gave up. I met Rebecca Harlow in a community center in Denver. Of all places, a quiet room behind a row of classrooms that doubled as a space for local advocacy workshops. I knew her the moment I saw her, even before she spoke. Short hair. Wire-rimmed glasses. A sharp, almost guarded way of scanning the room. She wasn't just hiding. She had learned how to live unseen. We sat across from each other in 2 folding chairs with nothing but a battered manila folder between us. She handed it to me like she was passing off a live grenade. Inside were the remnants of a life's work. Photocopies of documents, handwritten letters, and a printed email chain between Madison and a human rights legal group dated 2004. My mother had tried to tell the truth. She just never had the army to back her up. Till now. Rebecca looked at me. Her voice soft but steeled by years of survival. They tried to bury me too, she said. They froze my bank accounts, hacked my laptop, blackballed me from every paper I applied to. I couldn't get an internship at a blog. I nodded slowly. I believe you. She tilted her head, half smiling. I know. That's why I came out of the dark. 4 weeks, Rebecca, Mara, Judith, Madison, and I met in secret. Sometimes in small cafes, sometimes online, once in the back room of an old bookstore with no security cameras. We pooled our records, our stories, our strength. And from that fragile union came something unstoppable. We called it the Silence Breakers. a non-profit organization dedicated to supporting victims of wrongful institutionalization and whistleblower suppression. But it wasn't just about lawsuits and paperwork. It was about telling stories. Loudly, boldly, relentlessly. We launched a site where survivors could upload their experiences, anonymously or not. Within 72 hours, we received over 600 submissions. Stories that sounded eerily familiar. Women declared unstable after reporting harassment. Veterans committed for PTSD and forced into silence. Young girls sent away for being too rebellious. It was a mirror, held up to a system that had always justified itself through shame and science. The media picked up our movement faster than we could brace ourselves. Partly because of Mara's network, partly because people were tired of watching good people get buried while the architects of their pain retired into wealth and legacy. We gave interviews. We hosted forums. And slowly we turned the fear into fuel. Madison stayed quiet during the early waves. She wasn't ready to speak publicly yet. But she wrote long letters in tight cursive to women still trapped in the system. She signed each one V. Never Crazy. One night, I found a note tucked into the side of my laptop. It simply read, "You gave me my voice back. Let me use it when I'm ready." That spring, we hosted our first public event in a library auditorium just outside Chicago. Symbolic because it was the first place I'd felt safe after leaving that motel. We thought a few dozen people would come. 300 showed up. Women, children, nurses, former patients, journalists, silent watchers who now had names. Madison walked onto the stage at the end. No notes, no script, just a black dress and a microphone. She told her story, start to finish. About the research, the cover-up, the lies they injected into her veins. She didn't cry. She didn't raise her voice. But the room did. When she finished, they stood. All of them. Not clapping, cheering. Because in that moment, Madison wasn't a victim. She wasn't a case number. She wasn't a whisper. She was truth, finally given a microphone. We continued our work for months, then years. Gregory Monroe's trial ended in a guilty verdict. He was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison, though it was the shame that truly broke him. His face, once polished and admired, now lived on the internet beside words like predator, cover-up, and adoption fraud. Colin Harrow didn't last as long. He struck a deal, but the licensing board stripped him of his title. He vanished from public life. But the silence breakers made sure his legacy wouldn't. We published a searchable database of medical facilities tied to unethical treatments. We helped pass a law, the Vexler Act, that required external oversight of all mental health commitments involving minors or whistleblowers. They tried to erase Madison from history, but we wrote her name into law. Sometimes justice isn't loud. Sometimes it's quiet. It looks like a flower bed on a windowsill, planted by a woman who used to watch the world from inside a locked room. It looks like a mother and daughter drinking coffee together, not saying much, but saying everything just by being there. One morning I walked into Madison's apartment, modest, warm, safe, and found a note folded beside her teacup. "You are the only reason I didn't give up." I didn't respond. I just folded it, put it in my wallet next to the photo we took the day she walked out of Clear Haven. And we said nothing. Because for the first time we didn't need to. That silence was not fear anymore. It was freedom. It's been 3 years. 3 years since I stood in front of a white door at Clear Haven and whispered, "Miss Madison?" 3 years since the truth tore through the darkness they thought would never break. Some mornings I still wake up thinking I'm back in that motel. That the carpet smells like damp and bleach. That I'll open the door and find no one waiting. But then the sunlight shifts across my bedroom wall, and I remember, I'm no longer hiding. I live in a quiet apartment above a bookstore now. Madison lives 5 blocks away. We see each other twice a week, sometimes more. She's growing stronger. She's even taking college courses online, psychology of course. When I asked her why, she smiled softly. Because now I get to ask the questions. The Silence Breakers became more than a movement. Became a home. We've helped over 300 survivors obtain legal aid, and 2 major facilities have been shut down since our reports went public. Rebecca Harlow works full-time with us now. Still cautious, still quiet, but her inbox is always full. Survivors write to her. Journalists ask for her help. She has become what she once needed herself, a beacon. Mara Reyes never returned to cable news. She refused every interview, every book deal. But she started a podcast with us, a series called Buried Voices. Each episode tells a different story. Sometimes I narrate, sometimes Judith does, and sometimes we just let the survivors speak for themselves, raw and unfiltered. People listen, not just out of pity, but out of a need to understand what has been ignored for too long. One of our most powerful episodes wasn't even about Madison or me. It was a woman named Olivia who'd been institutionalized for delusional reporting when she filed a complaint against her CEO in 2011. Turned out, the CEO was connected to the same network of pharmaceutical donors that had once funded the Vail Foundation. Her story made national news. The ripples never stopped. The night the Vexler Act passed, I stood outside the Capitol building in D.C. with Madison, Rebecca, and Mara. We didn't cry. We didn't cheer. We just stood there, holding hands as the building lights flickered behind the trees. The Vexler Act mandates independent oversight on all mental health institutionalizations where financial conflicts of interest exist. It also guarantees immediate legal counsel for whistleblowers declared mentally unfit within a system they previously accused. Madison's name is in the bill's first paragraph. The woman they once labeled unstable. Now the law carries her truth. Sometimes people ask me if I regret it. If I wish I'd never opened that cabinet. Never read that envelope. Never uncovered the name Madison Vexler. But how could I? That name gave me everything. Gave me a mother. Gave me a voice. Gave me back my life. 1 week ago, I went back to the house I grew up in. It was for sale now. The shutters were hanging loose. The porch was cracked. The same porch I used to sit on while pretending everything inside was normal. I stood there for a long time. The neighbors didn't recognize me. I didn't blame them. I wasn't the same girl. I walked around the back through the gate that's still stuck in the middle. The garden was overgrown. Weeds everywhere. But near the fence, there was still a rusted lawn chair. Sat there. And I forgave them. Not because they deserved it. But because I did. I forgave them so I could stop being their secret. Their shadow. Their shield. I got up, dusted myself off, and walked away from that house for the last time. And this time I didn't look back. I'm not Katie Monroe, the adopted girl anymore. I'm Katie Vexler, the woman who exposed a machine built on silence, and tore it down with nothing but a notebook, a mother's memory, and the courage to speak when no one else would. I still carry that yellow birth certificate in my coat pocket. Not because I need proof, but because I want to remember where I started. I want to remember that even paper can lie, but your heart never does. They tried to erase me before I even knew who I was. Now I write stories that make sure no one else gets erased again. My name is Katie Vexler, and I am the voice they couldn't silence. What do you think about Katie's journey and the truth she uncovered? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if her story moved you, make sure to follow for more powerful and emotional stories just like this. Only on Revenge Echoes. No family built on lies can stand forever. And no voice once found can ever be silenced again. The story of Katie Vexler reminds us that justice doesn't start with outrage. It starts with courage. If you believe in truth, in the strength of the unheard, and in the power of redemption, hit subscribe, share this story, and leave your thoughts below. Every story matters. Even the ones they tried to bury.